Your Invisible Power by Genevieve Behrend. Chapter 5. Expressions from Beginners. Hundreds of persons have realised that visualising is an Aladdin's lamp to him with a mighty will. General Foch says that his feelings were so outraged during the Franco-Prussian War in 1870 that he visualised himself leading a French army against the Germans to victory. He said he made his picture, smoked his pipe and waited. This is one result of visualising we are all familiar with. A famous actress wrote a long article in one of the leading Sunday papers last winter describing how she rid herself of excessive body fat and weight by seeing her figure constantly as she wished it to be. A very interesting letter came to me from a doctor's wife while I was lecturing in New York. She began with the hope that I would never discontinue my lectures on visualisation, making humanity realise the wonderful fact that they possess the method of liberation within themselves. Relating her own experience, she said that she had been born on the east side of New York in the poorest quarter. From earliest girlhood, she had cherished a dream of marrying a physician some day. This dream gradually formed a stationary mental picture. The first position she obtained was in the capacity of a nursemaid in a physician's family. Leaving this place, she entered the family of another doctor. The wife of her employer died, and in time the doctor married her, the result of her long-pictured yearning. After that, both she and her husband conceived the idea of owning a fruit farm in the south. They formed a mental picture of the idea and put their faith in its eventual fulfilment. The letter she sent me came from their fruit farm in the south. It was while at the farm that the doctor's wife wrote me. Her second mental picture had seen the light of materialisation. Many letters of a similar nature come to me every day. The following is a case that was printed in the New York Herald last May. Atlantic City, May 5th. She was an old woman, and when she was arraigned before Judge Clarence Goldenberg in the police court today, she was so weak and tired she could hardly stand. The judge asked the court attendant what she was charged with. "Stealing a bottle of milk, Your Honour," repeated the officer. "She took it from the doorstep of a downtown cottage before daybreak this morning." "Why did you do that?" Judge Goldenberg asked her. "I was hungry," the old woman said. "I didn't have a cent in the world and no way to get anything to eat except to steal it. I did not think anyone would mind if I took a bottle of milk." "What's your name?" asked the judge. "Weinberg," said the old woman. "Elizabeth Weinberg." Judge Goldenberg asked her a few questions about herself. Then he said, "Well, you're not very wealthy now, but you're no longer poor. I've been searching for you for months. I've got $500 belonging to you from the estate of a relative. I'm the executor of the estate." Judge Goldenberg paid the woman's fine out of his own pocket and then escorted her into his office, where he turned the legacy over to her and sent a policeman out to find her a lodging place. I learned later that this little woman had been desiring and mentally picturing $500, while all the time ignorant of how it could possibly come to her, but she kept her vision and strengthened it with her faith. In the recent edition of Good Housekeeping there was an article by Addington Bruce entitled "Stiffening Your Mental Backbone." It is very instructive and would benefit anyone to read it. He says, in part, "Form the habit of devoting a few moments every day to thinking about your work in a large, broad, imaginative way, as a vital necessity to yourself and a useful service to society." Huntington, the great railway magnate, before he started building his road from coast to coast, said that he took hundreds of trips all along the line before there was a rail laid. It was said that he would sit for hours with a map of the United States before him and mentally travel from coast to coast, just as we do now over his fulfilled mental picture. It would be possible to call your attention to hundreds of similar cases. The best method of picturing to yourself that which you may desire is both simple and enjoyable, if you once understand the principle back of it well enough to believe it. First, and above everything else, be sure of what it is you really want. Then specialise your desire along these lines. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Suggestions for making your mental picture. Perhaps you want to feel that you've lived to some purpose. You want to be content and happy, and feel that with good health and with successful business you could enjoy this state of mind. After you have decided once and for all that this is what you want, you proceed to picture yourself healthy and your business just as great a success as you can naturally conceive it growing into. The best time for making your definite picture is just before breakfast and before retiring at night. As it is necessary to give yourself plenty of time, it may be necessary to rise earlier than is your usual habit. Go into a room where you will not be disturbed. Meditate for a few moments upon the practical working of the law of visualizing and ask yourself, how did the things about me first come into existence? How may I find it helpful to get more quickly in touch with the invisible supply? Someone felt that comfort would be better expressed and experienced by sitting on a chair than on the floor. The very beginning of the meditation, the chair, was the desire to be at ease. With this came the picture of some sort of a chair. The same principle applies to the hat and the clothes that you wear. Go carefully into this thought of the principle back of the thing. Establish it as a personal experience. Make it a fact to your consciousness. If you are thorough in this, you will find yourself in the deep consciousness beneath the surface of your own thought power. Then open a window, take about 10 deep breaths, and during the time draw a large imaginary circle of light around you. As you inhale, keeping yourself in the center of this circle of light, see great rays of light coming from the circle and entering your body at all points, centralizing itself at your solar plexus. Hold the breath a few moments at this central light of your body, the solar plexus, then slowly exhale. As you do this, mentally see imaginary rays or sprays of light going up through the body and down and out through the feet. Mentally spray your entire body with this imaginary light. When you have finished the breathing exercise, sit in a comfortable upright chair and mentally know that there is but one life, one substance, and this life substance of the universe is finding pleasure in self-recognition in you. Repeat some affirmation of this kind until you feel the truth and reality of the words that you are affirming. Then begin your picture. Whether your desire is for a state of consciousness or a possession, large or small, begin at the beginning. If you want a house, begin by seeing yourself in the kind of house you desire. Go all through it, taking careful note of the rooms, where the windows are situated, and such other details as help you to feel the reality of your concept. You might change some of the furniture and look into some of the mirrors just to see how healthy, wealthy, and happy you look. Go over your picture again and again until you feel the reality of it. Then write it all down just as you have seen it, with the feeling that the best there is mine. There is no limit to me, because my mind is the center of divine operation, and your picture is as certain to come true in your physical world as the sun is to shine. End of chapter 6. Things to remember in using your thought power for the production of new conditions. 1. Be sure to know what conditions you wish to produce, then weigh carefully to what further results the accomplishment of your desire will lead. 2. By letting your thought dwell upon a mental picture, you are concentrating the creative spirit to this center, where all its forces are equally balanced. 3. Visualizing brings your objective mind into a state of equilibrium, which enables you to consciously direct the flow of spirit to a definitely recognized purpose, and to carefully guide your thought from including a flow in the opposite direction. 4. You must always bear in mind that you are dealing with a wonderful potential energy, which is not yet differentiated into any particular mold, and that, by the action of your mind, you can differentiate it into any specific mold that you will. Your picture assists you to keep your mind fixed on the fact that the inflow of this creative energy is taking place. Also, by your mental picture, you are determining the direction you wish the sensitive creative power to take, and by doing this, the externalization of your picture is a certainty. 5. Remember, when you are visualizing properly, that there is no strenuous effort on your thoughts to hold your thought forms in place. Strenuous effort defeats your purpose and suggests the consciousness of an adverse force to be fought against, and this creates conditions adverse to your picture. 6. By holding your picture in a cheerful frame of mind, you shut out all thoughts that would disperse the spiritual nucleus of your picture. Because the law is creative in its action, your pictured desire is certain of accomplishment. 7. The seventh and great thing to remember in visualizing is that you are making a mental picture for the purpose of determining the quality you are giving to the previously undifferentiated substance and energy, rather than to arrange the specific circumstances for its manifestation. That is the work of creative power itself. it will build its own forms of expression quite naturally, if you will allow it, and save you a great deal of needless anxiety. What you really want is expansion in a certain direction, whether of health, wealth, or what not, and so long as you get it, as you surely will if you confidently hold to your picture, what does it matter whether it reaches you by some channel which you thought you could count upon, or through some other of whose existence you had no idea? You are concentrating energy of a particular kind for a particular purpose. Bear this in mind, and let specific details take care of themselves, and never mention your intention to anyone. Remember always that nature, from her clearly visible surface to her most arcane depths, is one great storehouse of light and good, entirely devoted to your individual use. Your conscious oneness with the great whole is the secret of success. When once you have fathomed this, you can enjoy your possession of the whole or a part of it at will, because by your recognition you have made it and can increasingly make it yours. Never forget that every physical thing, whether for you or against you, was a sustained thought before it was a thing. Thought as thought is neither good nor bad. It is creative action and always takes physical form. Therefore the thoughts you dwell upon become the things you possess or do not possess. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. Why I took up the study of mental science. I have frequently been questioned about my reasons for taking up the study of mental science, and as to the results of my search, not only in knowledge of principles, but also in the application of that knowledge to the development of my own life and experience. Such inquiries are justifiable, because one who essays the role of a messenger and teacher of psychological truths can only be effective and convincing as he or she has tested them in the laboratory of mental experience. This is particularly true in my case, as the only personal pupil of Thomas Troward, the greatest master of mental science of the present day, whose teaching is based upon the relation borne by the individual mind toward the universal creative mind, which is the giver of life, and the manner in which that relation may be invoked to secure expansion and fuller expression in the individual life. The initial impulse toward the study of mental science was an overwhelming sense of loneliness. In every life there must come some such experiences of spiritual isolations as, at that period, pervaded my life. Notwithstanding the fact that each day found me in the midst of friends, surrounded by mirth and gaiety, there was a persistent feeling that I was alone in the world. I had been a widow for about 3 years, wandering from country to country, seeking for peace of mind. The circumstances and surroundings of my life were such that my friends looked upon me as an unusually fortunate young woman. Although they recognized that I had sustained a great loss when my husband died, they knew that he had left me well provided for, free to go anywhere at pleasure, and having many friends. Yet if my friends could have penetrated my inmost emotions, they would have found a deep sense of emptiness and isolation. This feeling inspired a spirit of unrest that drove me on and on in fruitless search upon the outside for that which I later learned could only be obtained from within. I studied Christian Science, but it gave me no solace, though fully realizing the great work the scientists were doing, and even having the pleasure and privilege of meeting Mrs. Eddy personally. But it was impossible for me to accept the fundamental teachings of Christian Science and make practical application of it. When about to abandon the search for contentment and resign myself to resume a life of apparent amusement, a friend invited me to visit the great seer and teacher Abdu'l-Baha. After my interview with this most wonderful of men, my search for contentment began to take a change. He had told me that I would travel the world over seeking the truth, and when I had found it, would speak it out. The fulfilment of the statement of this great seer then seemed to be impossible, but it carried a measure of encouragement, and at least indicated that my former seeking had been in the wrong direction. I began, in a feeble and groping way, to find contentment within myself, for had he not intimated that I should find the truth? This was the big thing, and about the only thing I remember of our interview. A few days later, upon visiting the office of a New Thought practitioner, my attention was attracted to a book on his table entitled The Edinburgh Lectures on Mental Science by Thomas Troward. It interested me to see that Troward was a retired divisional judge from the Punjab, India. I purchased the book, thinking I would read it through that evening, Many have endeavoured to do the same thing, only to find, as I did, that the book must be studied in order to be understood, and hundreds have decided, just as I did, to give it their undivided attention. After finding this treasure book, I went to the country for a few days, and while there studied the volume as thoroughly as I could. It seemed extremely difficult, and I decided to purchase another book of Troward's, in the hope that its study might not require so much of an effort. Upon inquiry, I was told that a subsequent volume, The Door Lectures, was much the simpler and better of the two books. When I procured it, I found that it also must be studied. It took me weeks and months to get even a vague conception of the meaning of the first chapter of Door, which is entitled Entering into the Spirit of It. I mean by this that it took me months to enter into the spirit of what I was reading. But in the meantime, a paragraph from page 26 arrested my attention as seeming the greatest thing I had ever read. I memorized it and endeavoured with all my soul to enter into the spirit of Troward's words. The paragraph reads, "My mind is a centre of divine operation. The divine operation is always for expansion and fuller expression, and this means the production of something beyond what has gone before, something entirely new, not included in the past experience, though proceeding out of it by an orderly sequence of growth. Therefore, since the divine cannot change its inherent nature, it must operate in the same manner with me. Consequently, in my own special world of which I am the centre, it will move forward to produce new conditions, always in advance of any that have gone before." It took an effort on my part to memorize this paragraph, but in the endeavour towards this end, the words seemed to carry with them a certain stimulus. Each repetition of the paragraph made it easier for me to enter into the spirit of it. The words expressed exactly what I had been seeking for. My one desire was for peace of mind. I found it comforting to believe that the divine operation in me could expand to fuller expression and produce more and more contentment. In fact, a peace of mind and a degree of contentment greater than I had ever known. The paragraph further inspired me with deep interest to feel that the life spark in me could bring into my life something entirely new. I did not wish to obliterate my past experience, but that was exactly what Troward said it would not do. The divine operation would not exclude my past experience, but proceeding out of them would bring some new thing that would transcend anything that I had ever experienced before. Meditation on these statements brought with it a certain joyous feeling. What a wonderful thing it would be if I could accept and sincerely believe, beyond all doubt, that this one statement of Troward's was true. Surely the divine could not change its inherent nature, and since divine life is operating in me, I must be divinely inhabited, and the divine in me must operate just as it operates upon the universal plane. This meant that my whole world of circumstances, friends and conditions would ultimately become a world of contentment and enjoyment of which I am the centre. This would all happen just as soon as I was able to control my mind, and thereby provide a concrete centre around which the divine energies could play. Surely it was worth trying for. If Troward had found this truth, why not I? This idea held me to my task. Later I determined to study with the man who had realized and given to the world so great a statement. It had lifted me from my state of despondency. The immediate difficulty was the need for increased finances. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. How I attracted to myself $20,000. In the laboratory of experience in which my newly revealed relation to divine operation was to be tested, the first problem was a financial one. My income was a stipulated one, quite enough for my everyday needs. But it did not seem sufficient to enable me to go comfortably to England where Troward lived, and remain for an indefinite period to study with so great a teacher as he must be. So before inquiring whether Troward took pupils, or whether I would be eligible in case he did, I began to use the paragraph I had memorized. Daily, in fact almost hourly, the words were in my mind. My mind is a centre of divine operation, and divine operation means expansion into something better than has gone before. From the Edinburgh lectures I had read something about the law of attraction, and from the chapter of Causes and Conditions I had gleaned a vague idea of visualizing. So every night, before going to sleep, I made a mental picture of the desired $20,000. 20 $1,000 bills were counted over each night in my bedroom, and then, with the idea of more emphatically impressing my mind with the fact that this $20,000 was for the purpose of going to England and studying with Troward, I wrote out my picture, saw myself buying my steamer ticket, walking up and down the ship's deck from New York to London, and finally saw myself accepted as Troward's pupil. This process was repeated every morning and every evening, always impressing more and more fully upon my mind Troward's memorized statement, "My mind is a centre of divine operations." I endeavoured to keep this statement in the back part of my consciousness all the time, with no thought in mind as to how the money might be obtained. Probably the reason why there was no thought of the avenues through which the money might reach me was because I could not possibly imagine where the $20,000 would come from. So I simply held my thoughts steady and let the power of attraction find its own ways and means. One day, while walking on the street, taking deep breathing exercises, the thought came, "My mind is surely a centre of divine operation. If God fills all space, then God must be in my mind also. If I want this money to study with Troward, that I may know the truth of life, then both the money and the truth must be mine, though I am unable to feel or see the physical manifestation of either. Still, I declared, it must be mine." While these reflections were going on in my mind, there seemed to come up from within me the thought, "I am all the substance there is." Then from another channel in my brain the answer seemed to come. Of course, that's it. Everything must have its beginning in mind. The I, the idea, must be the only one and primary substance there is, and this means money as well as everything else. My mind accepted this idea, and immediately all the tension of mind and body was relaxed. There was a feeling of absolute certainty of being in touch with all the power life has to give. All thought of money, teacher, or even my own personality vanished in the great wave of joy which swept over my entire being. I walked on with this feeling of joy steadily increasing and expanding until everything about me seemed to glow with resplendent light. Every person I passed was illuminated as I was. All consciousness of personality had disappeared, and in its place there came that great and almost overwhelming sense of joy and contentment. That night, when I made my picture of the $20,000, it was with an entirely changed aspect. On previous occasions, when making my mental picture, I had felt that I was waking up something within myself. This time there was no sensation of effort. I simply counted over the $20,000. Then, in the most unexpected manner, from a source of which I had no consciousness at the time, there seemed to open a possible avenue through which the money might reach me. At first it took great effort not to be excited. It all seemed so wonderful, so glorious to be in touch with supply. But had not Troward cautioned his readers to keep all excitement out of their minds in the first flush of realization of union with infinite supply, and to treat this fact as a perfectly natural result that had been reached through our demand? This was even more difficult for me than it was to hold the thought that all the substance there is I am, I, idea, am the beginning of all form, visible or invisible. Just as soon as there appeared a circumstance which indicated the direction through which the $20,000 might come, I not only made a supreme effort to regard the indicated direction calmly as the first sprout of the seed I had sown in the Absolute, but left no stone unturned to follow up that direction by fulfilling my part. By so doing, one circumstance seemed naturally to lead to another, until, step by step, my desired $20,000 was secured. To keep my mind poised and free from excitement was my greatest effort. This first concrete fruition of my study of mental science as expounded by Troward's book had come by a careful following of the methods he had outlined. In this connection, therefore, I can offer to the reader no better gift than to quote Troward's book, The Edinburgh Lectures, from which may be derived a complete idea of the line of action I was endeavouring to follow. In the chapter on causes and conditions, he says, "To get good results, we must properly understand our relation to the great impersonal power we are using. It is intelligent and we are intelligent, and the two intelligences must cooperate. We must not fly in the face of the law expecting it to do for us what it can only do through us, and we must therefore use our intelligence with the knowledge that it is acting as the instrument of a greater intelligence, and because we have this knowledge we may and should cease from all anxiety as to the final result. In actual practice, we must first form the ideal conception of our object with the definite intention of impressing it upon the universal mind. It is this thought that takes such thought out of the region of mere causal fancies, and then affirm that our knowledge of the law is sufficient reason for a calm expectation of a corresponding result, and that therefore all necessary conditions will come to us in due order. We can then turn to the affairs of our daily life with the calm assurance that the initial conditions are either there already or will soon come into view. If we do not at once see them, let us rest content with the knowledge that the spiritual prototype is already in existence, and wait till some circumstance pointing in the desired direction begins to show itself. It may be a very small circumstance, but it is the direction and not the magnitude that is to be taken into consideration. As soon as we see it, we should regard it as the first sprouting of the seed sown in the Absolute, and do calmly and without excitement whatever the circumstances seem to require, and then, later on, we shall see that this doing will, in turn, lead to a further circumstance in the same direction, until we find ourselves conducted step by step to the accomplishment of our object. In this way, the understanding of the great principle of the law of supply will, by repeated experiences, deliver us more and more completely out of the region of anxious thought and toilsome labour, and bring us into a new world where the useful employment of all our powers, whether mental or physical, will only be an unfolding of our individuality upon the lines of its own nature, and therefore a perpetual source of health and happiness, a sufficient inducement, surely, to the careful study of the laws governing the relation between the individual and the universal mind. To my mind, then as now, this quotation outlines the core and centre of the method and manner of approach necessary for coming in touch with infinite supply. At least it, together with the previously quoted statement, "My mind is a centre of divine operation," etc., constituted the only apparent means of attracting to myself the $20,000. My constant endeavour to get into the spirit of these statements and to attract to myself this needed sum was about 6 weeks, at the end of which time I had in my bank the required $20,000. This could be made into a long story, giving all the details, but the facts, as already narrated, will give you a definite idea of the magnetic condition of my mind while the $20,000 was finding its way to me. End of chapter 9.